All right. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight's going to be a little different. Um, I don't know how many of you guys have dealt with cancer in your lifetimes, as far as like family members and stuff. I have a couple of times, like the first real occasion. First of all, I'm probably going to talk about some personal stuff, a little bit about me, my family. If you're not interested in that, that's fine. If you are, stick around. I have no idea how this video is even gonna go. I don't really have a plan for it. I just figured I'd talk about what comes to mind. One of the things that has always puzzled me, I guess, about I wouldn't call myself a religious person. I would call myself like a spiritual person. I absolutely believe in God. I love God. I pray. I was never when I was a kid, right? Church was a huge part of my life. I went to Catholic church when I was a little kid. Then I went to Lutheran a little bit later in life, Lutheran church. Church was always just one of those places that you went to. For my family, at least, it wasn't optional. Like I said, I went to Catholic school. God was God. As I got older, I rebelled a little, especially once I became a teenager, played around a little bit, looked into other things, other religions, other stuff. But I never really, like, it never dawned on me throughout the course of, the journey that there wasn't a God. I've like looked into atheism, I've looked into that stuff, and I've looked into, agnostic type stuff, but it never really it never really was a possibility that there wasn't some brilliant mind behind the creation of everything that is. I guess creationism. The belief that everything has a purpose, everything in order. So one of the big, I guess, flaws in creationism is cancer. My older brother actually had cancer and died of it when I was a kid. His name was Paul. He had neuroblastoma, which, if you guys aren't familiar, is a particularly aggressive form of cancer where the blood cells attack each other. It was initially misdiagnosed as leukemia. So, this was also many, many years ago. So the treatments were different, and there were some issues. So I'm not sure how many months ago, maybe a year ago, I don't know. My grandmother informed me that she was diagnosed with cancer. Now, my my father died from bone cancer. My mother beat cancer twice in her lifetime and then passed away from a heart attack at age 50. So, in a few I don't know, about half a year, I will have outlived my mother. So the cancer that my grandmother has is bladder cancer. And my understanding is the particular form of bladder cancer that she has is a very aggressive form of cancer. I don't know all the terminology. I didn't pull it, just so you guys know, I don't have all of the information in front of me about the treatment that she's on. I just know that she was diagnosed with bladder cancer. There were treatments that she was given and doing. And today she had another treatment and another, I guess, procedure of some sort where they were going to go in and biopsy the cancer and then see whether the treatments were having any effect. And this has been going on for months and months and months now, with her going and having the treatments and her being told, well, we don't know. It's always the same bullshit from these doctors. Well, we don't know. We don't know whether it's having any effect. We cut this out, but it seems to have grown back. We did this, and there's no noticeable change. We freaking gave you all this stuff, that has messed you up and made you ill, but we don't know. We don't fricking know what the effect is, what it's doing. Ultimately, the doctor told her, I think today, that she has to make a decision whether or not to continue treatment. And how the hell do you make a decision like that? How do you determine, well, I've been getting these treatments, I've been doing everything the doctors have told me to do, but they don't know whether this is even working. How do you then turn around and say, oh yeah, I want to stop treatment, or I want to continue treatment, not knowing if it's even doing anything? Like I said, they cut it out, the tumor initially cut it out, and then I guess it grew back or started to grow back or something. They cut that out again. And I don't know what kind of, I know it's on my phone somewhere. I could dig it up, but it's not chemo, but it kind of is. It's like a blood treatment or some kind of treatment that the doctor said this is the best option that you have. And so she did it. So I've really been like thinking, right? One of the big things that atheists like to throw up there is, well, if there's a God, then why do children suffer with cancer? Why is there war? Why is there this? Why is there that? And one of the things that, one of the best answers that I've ever heard is, how do you even know that cancer is from God even in the first place? Sean and I have been doing the show for a while. I've been doing it for years. And one of the things that we consistently report on are the cancerous causing stuff in not only our food, but our everyday surroundings. Everything around us causes cancer. Macaroni and cheese causes cancer. And I don't know about you, but like I eat the hell out of that stuff when I was growing up, man. Even as an adult, you just talk about easy, all you need is a little milk, a little butter, the Kraft macaroni and cheese in the box, the cancer in a pouch stuff. Well, obviously at the time we didn't know it was cancer causing. It was just an easy meal. Nowadays, it's only the pouch, the shells and cheese for me, the real cheese. But even that, who knows anymore? But everything causes cancer. So, yeah, it's no great surprise that pretty much everyone I know in my life has either beaten cancer, gotten diagnosed with cancer, or has cancer. It's just, how do you reconcile? And the easy answer is, we'll just have faith. Everything happens for a reason. Well, what is the reason that people suffer with cancer? Is it, and God won't give you more than he can handle? And this is not meant to come off as bashing God, because I still do believe very much in God. But what if everything that happens, right, especially the detrimental stuff, let's face it, how many wars does God directly cause? And I'm not talking about the Old Testament, I'm talking about now, today. How many wars is God himself directly responsible for? And I'm not talking about jihad or those people who claim God, because personally, as kind of a side note, one of the big sins that the church likes to tell you is, using God's name in vain. Obviously, it's one of the commandments, but I believe that there's a flawed understanding of what that means. If you look back at the original translations, my understanding of it is actually making yourself represent God, not cursing, saying GD or anything like that. It's representing yourself as the will or avatar of God. And I think that's pretty awful. There's a reason that that's up there. And so I believe that those people who are involved in holy wars and who slaughter people in the name of God are especially heinous and evil. But that said, it's hard to reconcile a God of love and a God of forgiveness and charity and love and all the things that we've been told that God represents with the suffering and pain. And I'm going to tell you, I watched my father. I still to this day can't really call him my dad because he wasn't a dad to me. But at the end, he wanted his children around him. Did he deserve that? No, that's between him and his children. I'm not, I know what I did, which was go to him and comfort him in his last days. My siblings, the half brothers and sisters that I have, did not choose to do that, and that's up to them. They have their own personal relationship with the man that brought them into this world, and who am I to judge? But I went to him because he was calling for all of us, and he was so frail. He had bone cancer, and it was in its final stages. And he was in essentially a hospital bed in his living room and hooked up to various things. And he was so thin. And one of the things so it's related, but my dad, my father, all the way up until, because I'm saying the word dad, my father, all the way up until his last days of bone cancer, always had a full, thick head of hair. And it's one of the things that I find frustrating because, as many of you know, without the hat, it's a little thin, right? Well, he was bald, and that was because of the aggressive treatments that he had been having in order to try to stave off the ravages that were happening to his body. And he was so thin and so frail looking. And this was a man who he was a truck driver. He joined the Marine Corps. He was always very, he was always there. He wasn't particularly tall, but he always had a presence about him. And that presence was shattered. It was gone. And so he was just this old, he wasn't even that old at the time, but he was this old man in a bed. And it was this insanely powerful reminder of, no matter how strong you are, no matter how much fear you can inflict in others, because he could, no matter any of that diseases, cancer in particular, will lay you low. And the reason that I even came to making this kind of video is because my grandmother has been particularly devout my entire life. I don't know about, her young years, her childhood. I don't know any of that, whether she was as adamant then as she was when I was around her. But for a short period, I lived with them. So several different periods. One of these occasions was when my mother and I first moved up to Indiana. We stayed with my grandparents for a short period, and she insisted that we go to church every week with her. We went to church. And this was a woman who prays for parking spots, and her prayers are answered. When I would go to the store with her, she'd pray for a parking spot, and boom, one would appear. This is not This isn't hyperbole. I watched it. I watched it happen. We'd go down the aisle. There was nothing, right? Her in the driver's seat. We'd drive down the aisle. There was nothing. Drive down the next aisle, full. Drive down the next aisle, packed. So she would say a short prayer, and we would come back down the aisle, and somebody was just pulling out in an amazing parking spot. And this wasn't a one-off. This happened consistently. Things that my grandmother prayed about happened in front of my eyes. I was able to witness this. So for a woman like this, who was always devout, she watched all the religious programs, right? And I mentioned briefly in my videos, especially when I ran for office, I've talked about my grandmother. I love her very much. She was an integral part of my childhood and particularly my early teen years. And so to watch a woman so devout and so loving of God, she watched the 700 Club. She watched the various TV preachers, and went to church every Sunday and went to Israel. And she, you did everything that the standard Christian, especially like Lutheran, that type of denomination expects. She did it all. All of it. And for her to then in her later years, which I'm going to be talk about her struggles for just a moment. So she was married to my grandfather for years and years and years. And my grandfather suffered some health problems. He was an Army and an Air Force veteran. He was somehow in both in two different branches of the armed service, and fought in I believe Korea. So he served his country. At some point, he was injured. He lost a finger, and he became a salesman, door-to-door salesman. He sold Singer sewing machines and then eventually sold cars. Anyway, later on down the road, my grandmother was there with him, obviously, and he suffered from dementia. And I saw, first of all, that was my first real face-to-face look at dementia. And she, I have never in my life, before or since, seen someone with the kind of iron resolve that she had, and I assume has to this day. It was horrific to see the man that had been, a very strong disciplinarian, and hey, he had his issues. We all did, but he used to point, right, with his because he lost the first finger of his hand somehow in the Army. So he would point, right, but he'd point with his middle finger, right? So this finger's not there. So it's his first finger, but it's not, it's his middle finger. And so he used to point all the time with it. And there at the end, when he started getting dementia, he used to argue about, he wanted to drive. He wanted to go out and take the car. Grandmother had to hide the keys from him. And then it was this big thing. Anyway, this is a woman who was just forever stoic, and I'm sure that she had her problems, and, there were personal things that I could get into that are irrelevant, but this was the same woman who had taken care of my brother at the end when he was dying from neuroblastoma. So cancer and dementia, and then after my grandfather passed away. She got remarried, which I was absolutely thrilled for her. I was really glad that she was able to find someone else and able to capture some degree of happiness. And unfortunately, that husband also passed away, who, by the way, was a veteran of World War II and was actually responsible for the raising of the flag at Iwo Jima, Midway, one of those two. The iconic flag raising picture. He was either taking the picture or in that picture. He was right there. And anyway, he ended up passing away. So then, by this time, she had moved out of state and had moved to his state, a neighboring state of ours. I live in Indiana, so not too far, but far enough away that I can't just go up the street anymore and see her. And after all of that, now she has cancer. And we're told, you're never going to be given more than you can handle. Well, who makes that determination? Anything that doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and all of this stuff. What's the convergence? How do you reconcile with a love of God and a belief in God and a belief that everything is by design? How do you reconcile that with the pain and suffering that even the most devout suffer? I mean, we're told if we're humble, if we love God, if we follow the commandments. This was a woman that when we first moved in, she wouldn't let my mom get cable. My mom wanted to get cable television so she could watch TV and so that I could have my programs that I was used to watching. And my grandmother forbid it. There will be no cable in this home because of, and I quote, the evil airwaves. This was a woman who was very, very devout and still is. I mean, still has a very, very strong belief in God. So if the most faithful of us are subjected to man's toxins, because let's face it, I believe that we have a lot to do. Not, we as in mankind have a lot to do with the ailments that befall us, cancer being one of them. Far from the only one, obviously. But I believe that, at least as far as cancer is concerned, and, fuck cancer for what that's worth. But I believe that we've created a lot of the problems that exist in this world. That said, if being that God is all powerful, then why does God allow people to go through this? And I mean, it wouldn't seem to be that difficult for God to prevent the suffering of people from cancer, especially those who have been exceptionally faithful to him throughout their life. And it hasn't shaken my faith per se, but it does make me ask, you see these various people who are not good people, who excel at various forms of life, whether it's fame, whether it's money, whether it's having nice things, financial freedom, these various things. And these are in many, many in many, many circumstances, these are not good people. And you see them living their dream, doing this, doing that, and just generally enjoying being alive. And then you have people like my grandmother who never had a bad word to say about anyone. Even she worked, right? She was a waitress for over 30 years at a restaurant here in Michigan City. It's since gone, but it was named Lindo's Restaurant. And she was a waitress there for, I think, like 35 years. She was a waitress there on her feet every day, working her butt off. Never had a bad word to say when she came home from work, at least that I heard. You didn't hear her come in and start complaining about her day, talking about how this customer was a jerk or her boss was an asshole. None of that. I heard none of that. And so when you have a good person like that, in my opinion, she's a good person. You know, like I said, there are personal family things there, but there always are, right? Ultimately, I think in her heart that she's a good person. So when you have someone like that suffering from a disease, a condition, of whatever, that God could easily stop, cure, prevent. You hear about these miracles all the time. These people get diagnosed with cancer. The cancer suddenly goes away. What did you do? I prayed. Like what? I mean, it wouldn't take anything. The fount of power, I assume, is limitless. Think of it. As the talk gets more concrete about, we have to live in a simulation, right? The scientists have proven that we live in a simulation, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So I tend to think of things in like video game format. So the server administrator, think of it like a MMO, right? World of Warcraft. A GM can do whatever they want. They can spawn in armor. They can change this. They can change that. And what does it hurt if they debuff this individual or they buff that individual? It's not like it's a limited amount of buffs they can do. It's not like it's a limited amount of armor they can hand out. It's, type in this, click done. And obviously it's a tiny fraction of the power that the creator of the universe would have. So why do people need to suffer? Why did my brother have to suffer? Now, my father's a different story. He wasn't exactly a good person, but my brother never hurt anybody. He was like 9 years old when he died. My grandmother didn't hurt anyone. Like I said, she's the most Christian woman I've ever known in my entire life. And I've been around some professed Christians. So what's the convergence there? How do we reconcile our belief in God with the diagnosis of cancer and the suffering that goes along with it? Because it's never just the one person, right? Unless you're completely insulated and you have no contact with any of your family, friends, anyone. It never affects just that individual, right? It's a ripple effect. So what about all the other people that are affected by it? And obviously I'm not trying to minimize the pain and suffering of the individual that actually suffers from it. But in my father's case, when he passed away, his wife was left to deal with the aftermath, the countless medical bills, the minimal assets, because everything else had been sold to pay for various treatments, etc. These are just questions right? They're just talking. What do you think? You know, have you struggled with your faith and had a question for God? I've I've come across some questions in my lifetime. I've had an up and down relationship, especially in my earlier years, my 20s and whatnot, late teens, early 20s, my little rebellious phase where I decided to look into other religions and see, do they know more than I? You know, I was brought up very limited in the scope of like what I learned, right? You go from the Catholic Church to the Lutheran Church. I mean, there's not a whole lot of difference there. You know, less Latin in the second one, but a lot of its core is the same. Uh, there was a period where I was a Southern Baptist. That was interesting. So I'm a little lighthearted story here for a moment for those of you familiar with, especially the differences in Catholics and Baptists. There was there was a there was a period when I lived in Alabama. I lived in Mobile, or just outside of Mobile, that whole area. There was a church, right, that would pick you up, and there was a friend of mine who went to that church, and he asked me to go to his church with him. So I did, and I, like I said, was attending a Catholic school at the time. So at this point, all of my learning as far as God was concerned was revolved around Catholicism. So we go to church, we have the thing, but it's like a Sunday school, like a much more small group environment than Catholicism, sitting in the pew and all of that stuff. And they get to the prayer, right? So they had their little story of the day, whatever it was that they were focusing on, and they get to the end of the day, and they said, okay, if anyone has any prayers, now's the time, if there's someone that you'd like us to pray for. And they got to me, and I said, I'd like to pray for all those in purgatory, awaiting awaiting judgment. And let's just say they were shocked. They proceeded to explain to me that purgatory didn't exist and all of this. And it was kind of at that point where I'm like, wait a minute, there's different people, like different groups that still believe in God, but have different ideas of how that like comes about and their interpretation of the same, I mean, essentially the same source material. So it was a long journey. Nowadays, I find it difficult to articulate exactly, I guess, the denomination therein. I definitely believe that we were created, that this world and this universe were created. There are way too many things that would have to be true for us not to be. And there are far too many coincidences and far too much, like the human body is designed so perfectly given what we're comprised of, right? And all of the way that nature interacts with each other and just the perfect combination of so many different factors leaves me very confident in saying, I believe that, we were created. I believe that there is a God. I believe that this universe, this world, this galaxy, whatever you want to call it, was all formed with a plan. But you get to the ground level and it's like, okay, where then does that leave us? How can you pray and give like I don't know, how can you have that discussion and that belief with a person, an individual, an entity that allows this kind of suffering? And again, it comes back to, well, how much of that is created by us and how much of it is God? And I don't expect to have any answers. I am not a like fount of knowledge or anything, but I found some interesting responses to that question. I don't know the names of them. I ran them across them, and I think it comes down to where I guess your belief lies in, do you believe that God created things like cancer? Or do you believe that man, through our various things we do, I mean, let's face it, it's in like everything we consume these days. Everything. It's like the one thing, yeah, there are people who have dealt with dementia, in their lives, someone they know. But like, you ask around and like everyone has some sort of experience with cancer that I've seen. Like everyone, whether it was a grandparent, a cousin, a brother, a spouse, a this, or that, everybody can say, oh yeah, my, whatever relative, my whatever friend, my husband's cousin's brother's sister had this or that or the other. Everyone that I know has some extended relative, friend connection that was affected or is affected by cancer. So what's the answer to that question then? And I truly don't know. I really don't know. If you guys know, tell me. How do you reconcile the two? How do you reconcile that this can affect people who have devoted their lives to the glorification of the being that controls everything, or at least could control everything? We're given free will, right? So how much of that comes into account? How much of that affects the things that we're subjected to? I mean, I guess adults, right, they don't get the sympathy, right, that the cancer kids do. Not that, cancer kids shouldn't get sympathy, because they should. But adults, it's always that, well, at least you're not 12 with it, or 6, or whatever. Like I said, my brother had it when he was young. I mean, very young. It eventually took his life when he was 9. So, I've seen a number of family members with it, of all ages. Like, there's, at least with war or that kind of thing, you can give that a human like motivation, right? You can give that a thinking individual's desire to cause harm. With cancer, it's like this mindless entity, this mindless, nefarious thing that worms its way into your life, and it causes pain and suffering and does all these things. So I don't know. There's no easy answers. Like I said, I don't expect to come to some epiphany while I'm talking. And hell, for all I know, you guys don't want this kind of content. I just figured I'd come on and have a chat and see what you guys think. Have you ever dealt, especially if you're, an individual of faith, spirituality, faith, whatever, and you believe that there's a creator and you believe that that creator could, if they so chose, erase the pain, erase the suffering, erase cancer. How much, like, how do you reconcile that? How do you say, well, yes, it's a God of love, and do you say, well, since cancer was created by man, in the chemicals that we put in everything we eat, everything we, our shampoo, our deodorant, our vehicles, you name it, cancer's everywhere. If that's the case, then does that fall under free will? Because as an individual, we can choose whether or not to consume, say, Kraft macaroni and cheese, or does that fall under something else? I don't know. It's something that I would like to talk to. One of the interesting things from my childhood, right? I was always the guy, the kid with the questions. I was always the kid that would ask the priests or the preacher or the whatever, right? The leader of whatever denomination. I would go to them and ask them questions about, well, I read this and this doesn't line up with this. So what's the answer? And so often the answer was, well, you got to have faith. With faith in what? You're not giving me, or only God knows the answer to that. Well, okay, but it's your job to interpret. Why aren't you able to tell me these things? And, especially as a kid, I had a lot of questions about cancer, and, since my brother and all, and there was no satisfactory answers there. So that's one of the reasons why I don't really have like a religious leader that I follow necessarily, because I've learned at an early age that these people don't have any more answers than I do. They're just as lost as we are. In some cases, they're a little more learned. They've read a little more. They've perhaps been through a little more, but they don't have any more answers than you or I. And that, that's one reason why I gravitated away from the Catholic faith at an early age, was because, number one, I felt like they were gatekeeping God, right? You have to go through the priest in order to talk to God. No, the Bible actually tells us differently. I was a voracious reader as a kid, and I read the Bible several times in my early years and pointed out that actually we do have a personal relationship, because it says so right here, the book that you profess to believe in. So and again, no answers, right? And that's cause for the spiritual journey. And, it's much better place now, much better belief system now. But again, what are the answers to these questions? There's never been a definitive. And I would say that it's more of a personal decision, right? Insofar as how do you correlate Christ with cancer? How do you come to terms with the fact that a loving God still allows pain and suffering? Because if an individual, an entity, a being greater than the universe created the universe, and if, according to Scripture, this individual loves us individually, knows our names before we are born, that they would allow their children to go through pain. Now, there have been those that have explained it as, well, do you stop your child from touching the stove? Initially, absolutely. But eventually, sometimes they have to get burned to learn that that's hot. I understand that in certain contexts. I don't understand it when it comes to cancer, because is that a lesson for those that survive? Is that a lesson for those that surround this person? It's not something that I think has an easy answer. If you guys know, like if you've ever dealt with this and you have a story, I'd love to hear it. If you're not comfortable putting it in the chat here, you can email me at talk@dionbergeron.com. You can follow us on social media, but you can ignore the rest of it. I've got the email link down there so that you can spell it out properly. It's talk@dionbergeron.com. And I'd love to hear from you, because it's a struggle. It's a struggle emotionally, and it's a struggle in trying to make sense of it, because what's the downside of not making people suffer? So like the book of Job, right? They like to point to the book of Job as, well, even God's most faithful is tested. Is that like a test of faith? Is that what cancer is? Or is that how it's used? Because if man created cancer, it's not exactly, is it then God's test? Is God's test to test whether you break, to test whether you can keep a straight face, to test whether you don't lose your mind and start attacking cancer doctors? What's the test exactly? I'm curious. Is it like a final exam or more like a midterm? Is it a pop quiz? I'm just genuinely fucking curious here. I don't know. So I'm not sure exactly the point or the end goal of allowing people to suffer with these kind of conditions, or if this is just something that has to happen for some unknown reason. Again, not. Yeah, it turns out that your hairline is actually carried in the genes of your maternal side. So thanks, Mom. The whole question, though, I don't know. What do you guys think? I'm interested. Let me know your thoughts. Like I said, this is a little different than my usual videos. Yes, it's a little personal, but whatever. I don't care. Before I end, might as well throw a little more personal stuff in here. So one of the, as many of you know, I was a correctional officer at Indiana State Prison. I never set out to be a correctional officer. It was actually after the end of my truck driving career. I couldn't drive a truck anymore because of the damage to my back. For those of you new to the channel who haven't been following all the videos when I ran for office, one of the reasons that because I drove semi cross country, right? Been to 48 of the 50 states, blah, 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 blah. One of the reasons why I stopped doing that was because I couldn't do it anymore. I had multiple herniated discs. I could go on and on as to the health stuff, but the short version is I couldn't drive truck anymore. Suffered an on-the-job injury. Part of the deal was no more driving trucks. So, okay. Had to figure out what else I was going to do. Everything finally got settled as far as the work comp and the long term, and all of that was all done and over with. And finally, they, released me from everything, and I was able to go do something. And I was looking around, I'm like, man, what am I going to do? Right? All of my skills involve truck driving and computers. Computers on more of a personal level. Although I had done some work doing websites, I was like, yeah, I could do that. But I happened to be looking, and they had an opening, right? In the, at the time, it was the newspaper where you looked for jobs, and a little bit online. So they had the job opening for Indiana Department of Corrections. And initially, I applied at Westville, but I didn't actually hear back from Westville. And so I waited, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks. I'm like, all right, I really need a job. And I applied for here in Michigan City at the state prison, which I was living in Michigan City. So it kind of made more sense to go to Michigan City. I think I applied to Westville just because it was a lower security clearance level thing. This is my mind at the time, right? It's not maximum security. It's like medium or, small security. I don't know. And so I applied there. And when you first start, at least at the time, it may have changed, but this was around 2006. When I first started there, you go in and your first initial, you have your interview, but then when they actually say, okay, yeah, you're hired, you go in and you start classes. And you go into class, and until you get your uniforms, you're in street clothes for a short period of time. You get issued a uniform, and you learn all the horrifying facts about the maximum security prison, Indiana State Prison. And one of the things that crossed my mind was, all these people in this tiny space, because ISP is huge when you look at it from the outside, until you realize that there are multiple thousands of people. There's like 2,000 people in that little space. It becomes much smaller when you realize that. And your first time behind the wall, right? Behind the wall, so if you look at Indiana State Prison, you have the administration building. It's the front big part, right? You got your little shack out front. That's the guard booth, checkpoint 1. And then you have the straight line ahead that goes into the parking lot around the sides. But that front big brick building is what's called administration. That's the admin building. Now it's kind of spaced out. Behind that administration building is what they call behind the wall. That's the actual prison proper. And there are multiple gates and security checkpoints and all of that between the two. But when you first go behind the wall and you're looking at all these men in this little space, the first thing on my mind was, man, I can't even imagine having to share space with people. That little space, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for decades. Some of these people are never going to leave. Imagine what they're willing to do. What are they going to do to them? And I have tons of prison stories, but the interesting part was such a huge difference, right? In the careers and what I did. And I wouldn't change it for the world, because that's where I met my wife. We worked several units together. We worked the dining room together and started off as friends. We're still friends. We just became intimate as well. That's a whole other thing. But why do I even mention this? I don't know. I don't know. I'm just talking. I guess I became a correctional officer. It's really funny though, to finish with this. One of the reasons that I became a correctional officer, some of you may or may not know this. So when I was in my late teens, I was with some people and a group of us, two of us, whatever, different numbers at different times, did some very stupid shit. And one of the things that we did was I was with a guy who sprayed salt water in a Coke machine. Now, this doesn't work anymore. This is not, but by any stretch of the imagination, telling you to do this because it doesn't work anymore. The machines are not vulnerable to this. But at the time, if you sprayed salt water in the dollar bill slot of a Coke machine, it would spit out all the Cokes and change. It was the early days of the dollar bill slots on the Coke machines, right? So this was like in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And again, if at the time you sprayed salt water in the dollar bill slot of the Coke machine, all the Cokes, and it would give you all the Cokes and change. All you had to do was hit buttons. It'd give you as much as you wanted, hit the change return, it dumped the change. So eventually, one of the individuals I knew had a much better idea. If this works on Coke machines, surely it'll work on bank machines. Suffice it to say that, let's just say that the internal wiring and components of an ATM machine are far more rigorous than that of a Coke machine. They also have cameras on those bank machines. Go figure. And long story short, an individual was arrested. Not for that. I was not arrested for that. An individual I know was arrested for that. And in the process of this, he says, oh, I know who did the Coke machines. Such and such did the Coke machines. Talking about me. And my stupidity, I thought the police were there to help us. I thought that, that's all of what they did. That never would they in any way trick us in order to solve a crime. That wouldn't happen, right? Well, long story short, which I guess it got kind of long anyway, but long story short, I was convicted of criminal damage to coin-operated vending machines, a really stupid name for a really stupid crime. I was like 19 by the time I was sentenced, and I was young and dumb. Point of all of this is I had been to county jail. I had done a little, very little, but I had done a little bit of time. It was a misdemeanor, not a felony. When I applied, I was very honest about what had happened, and I talked to them about it. And they said, it's a misdemeanor. I said, yes. They said, can you prove that? I said, absolutely. They said, okay, get the information from the case, the completion or whatever. I don't know. I don't know what there's a term for it. I can't remember what it's called, but it's not conclusion. It's something else. But the ending, and bring it to us, and we'll take a look. And I did, and they looked at it. Oh yeah, you're fine. You're fine. So, and again, this was in age 19. So by the time everything was over, like 1993 ish. So my thought in becoming a correctional officer was, I can help these people to not offend again, because I straightened my life out. I learned how to be a productive member of society. I learned how to avoid recidivism. I learned It doesn't work that way. Not as a CO, it doesn't. You're not going to change anyone's life. Really, you're not. I mean, you can in small ways, but you're not going to be the voice that they listen to when it comes to not doing dumb shit again. Especially when you have to go in with the mindset. By the way, if anyone is thinking of becoming a correctional officer, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you about the realities. Maybe I'll do a video of what to know before you become a correctional officer. Who knows? If you guys are interested, let me know. But one of the most important aspects that I learned in training and proved to be absolutely invaluable and 100% true. Always keep your word. If you tell an offender, inmate, whatever you want to call them, convict, if you tell them you're going to bring them a form, tell someone something, do something, stick to it. Keep your word. Why is that important? Because that's all you have. Behind bars, that's your currency. Can you be relied on? If what this officer tells you, if this officer tells you something, can you rely on it being true? That is more valuable than anything else out there. Also, treat everyone the same. Treat everyone fairly, like a human being. One of the hardest things, though, I'm going to say this, one of the hardest things when I started as a CO, when you find out someone is convicted of a horrific crime, right? That's why I tried not to learn anything about the crimes. And we were advised that in training. We were told, hey, don't learn about these guys' crimes. Don't look them up. Don't read the stuff. Don't because it's going to change how you view them. Their advice when you start, and I don't know if it's the same, like I said, it's a kinder, gentler DOC allegedly. But one of the things that we were told is treat everyone as if they have AIDS and treat everyone as if they're the worst kind of predator imaginable. Everybody across the board, treat them exactly the same and firm, fair, and consistent. That was the thing. Firm, be fair, be consistent. Treat everyone exactly the same. You'll never have to worry about being accused of favoritism or racism or this or that. Treat everyone the same. So I did that. And I was never intentionally attacked. There was an instance where someone threw something out their cell. They couldn't see, though. They thought the officer coming down the range was someone else. It was me. It was not normally my unit. So they felt bad. They apologized to me, which I thought was very nice of them, very neighborly, given that they had just thrown nasty stuff on me. But you do what you can. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for tonight. Back to our regularly scheduled programming come tomorrow, but figured I'd have a chat with you. I hope you guys have a good night. Hope I didn't bring you down too much. God bless you. God bless Indiana. God bless the United States of America. Hope you have a great night.